After our troops thwarted all enemy attempts to capture Novorossiysk, the main efforts of the enemy concentrated on the Tuapse direction. Not counting losses, he was tearing towards Tuapse, clearing the way for his troops by strikes of assault and bomber aviation. For several days of fighting on the outskirts of Tuapse, the Katyusha divisions repelled 5 enemy attacks, dispersed and destroyed 8 enemy battalions, suppressed 16 artillery and mortar batteries, 28 machine guns, set fire to 3 ammunition depots. To repel surprise attacks were allocated batteries on duty. Most fiercely Hitlerites bombed the gorge going from the Goykeksky Pass to Tuapse. Here were concentrated all available in our task force anti-aircraft means 5 37mm anti-aircraft guns and 8 twin machine guns. Very few air defense means were also in the rifle and artillery units. If in the Sal and Kuban steppes the main danger was posed by enemy tanks, in the mountains enemy aviation, we sought every opportunity to fight it. Anti-tank guns were now mainly used against low-flying and diving airplanes. However, single, scattered firing from them was ineffective. Breaking our heads over the air cover of combat orders of units, we came to the conclusion that in order to increase the effectiveness of shooting at low-flying and diving aircraft from anti-tank guns, they should be put on special tripods, provided with sights, like anti-aircraft machine guns, and combined into battle groups. This idea was supported by members of the military council Drozhozhin and Lomakovsky. The military council of the GMC task force decided to collect anti-tank guns from all divisions and adapt them for firing at aircraft. The PRM quickly made tripods from water pipes and developed the simplest anti-aircraft circular sights. A total of 72 anti-tank guns were converted, which were combined into a combined anti-aircraft division. It was positioned on the hills and mountainsides along the gorge, covering our battle orders. After the division shot down 3 enemy planes, the enemy stopped flying at low altitudes. In all Guards mortar units worked on the training of snipers from among the scouts and communicators, who were constantly in the fighting order of infantry. Having no experience of operations in the mountains, we did not know about the treacherous properties of mountain rivers. Meanwhile, at the end of August there were heavy rains, and a small, harmless rivulet, along which our units were located, turned into a powerful, raging stream. It swept away literally everything on its way: wagons, cars, boxes with food and ammunition. We faced another surprise. It turned out that the soil on the slopes of the mountains instantly leaks water. That is why there were puddles in the dugouts and dugouts covered with earth during the rains. When the fall came, the soldiers in the front line became quite bad. Once on the assignment of General Aya Petrov, we, with Adjutant Sasha Stroganov, went up to the mountain in Duke to check the organization of defense on this very important site. It was necessary to clarify where the leading edge of our defense is, to determine from where and where to fire. With the commander of the rifle battalion, we visited many trenches where machine gunners, snipers and machine gunners were on round-the-clock duty. For several days in a row it was drizzling rain. There were puddles of cold water in the trenches. It was possible to escape the rain only in a few dugouts, under the ceiling of which were stretched cloak tents. Such dugouts were difficult to dig out in the mountainous stony ground. No fires were allowed in the forward trenches. As soon as there was smoke somewhere, the enemy immediately opened mortar or artillery fire on it. It was possible to warm up and dry off only by descending into a deep gorge, where they made fire and cooked food, but it was very difficult to get there by winding, slippery mountain paths. We were soaked to the skin from the incessant drizzle. To dry off a little, the battalion commander suggested that we go into a cave, which was located very close to the front line. It housed an infirmary. We crawled through a low but rather wide entrance and found ourselves in a spacious cave. Its stone vault was a safe shelter. A small smokeless fire was burning in the middle, supported by a caring hand. It served as a source of heat and light. We were met by an elderly Ukrainian, the battalion's sanitary instructor. "Warm yourselves, comrades commanders, it's good here. Soldiers come here in turn, and sometimes the battalion commander and the deputy commander. They are always in the trenches, watching that the Krauts did not suddenly attack us. After all, we have nowhere else to retreat." "That's right, you say," I said. Here we will accumulate forces and hit so hard that the Nazis will not take away their legs.
Comrade Commander, who will you be?
I command the Katyushas. That's great. Why don't the Katyushas fire much? You should give us more fire. We'd love to, my darlings, but it's very hard to get shells here. Besides, it's not good to fire Katyushas at machine guns and machine gunners. It's like hitting a fly with a shoe. So you hope for the Katyushas, but do not fail yourself. My explanation caused friendly laughter. Descending from Mount Turkey, I thought about the fact that it was necessary to put the mountain installations into action as soon as possible. Supporting the rifle units fighting in the mountains, the commanders, political workers, and fighters of our divisions did everything possible and everything in their power. The headquarters of our task force from the commanders of armies, division commanders, and artillery chiefs received thank you notes, requests to increase the ammunition supply, and to plant at least one more battery on this or that site. About the combat activity of the 25th Guards Mortar Regiment, commanded by hero of the Soviet Union, Major M. Rodichev, told the letter of the Military Council of the 56th Army, signed by Major General A.I. Rishov, Brigade Commissar G.A. Komarov, and Major General G.S. Karyofeli. The letter stated, during its stay in the 56th Army from 8.8 to 6.10 1942, the regiment provided vigorous support to its units, which fought hard against superior enemy forces. The regiment showed examples of sudden and accurate fire on enemy concentrations near the city of Krasnodar, and with its powerful salvos provided the crossing of our troops across the Kuban River. For the excellent performance of the combat mission. On 11.8.1942, the Military Council of the Army to all personnel of 25 GMP announced gratitude. General Karyofeli, who signed this review, I knew before the war, when he was Deputy Commander of Artillery of the Belarusian Military District. He often conducted inspection firing, and more than once he inspected the 170th Artillery Regiment, which I commanded. Since that time I had an impression of General Karyofeli as an outstanding artilleryman, a wonderful man, a demanding military commander. When I read the review, I immediately thought if Karyofeli signed such a document, then the regiment is really worthy of praise. Similar reviews were received by other regiments and divisions of our group. In the heavy battles in which the GMC participated, of great importance was well-positioned party political work. Much attention was paid to it by the members of the Military Council of the group, commanders and deputy commanders of units on the political part, members of the Military Council M.I., Drozdjeshin and I. N. Lomakovsky systematically travelled to the troops. They brought to the command and political staff of the combat tasks and requirements of the Military Council of the Front, instructed political workers, secretaries of party and Komsomol organizations, attended party meetings and meetings of party bureaus of units, held talks, as told about the experience of the best units. All this united the personnel, encouraged them to fulfill combat tasks. In mobilizing the efforts of the personnel of the GMC, played a huge role in the appeal of the Military Council of the Black Sea Group of troops of the North Caucasus Front. This appeal was written on the occasion of awarding orders and medals to a large group of soldiers, as well as in connection with the anniversary of combat operations of the Guards mortar units of the front. The address said, "Comrades Guardsmen, in your hands are formidable, battle-tested weapons. German fascist bandits are afraid of your fire. Let your fire be even more destructive, even more terrible for the hated enemy. Harder the blow of your weapons." After the withdrawal to the mountains, the Guards mortar units of the Black Sea Group of forces operated in the Tuapse, Hot Khrushchev, and Novorossiysk directions. As needed, they were transferred from one army to another over long distances. From August to December 1942, the Military Council and headquarters of the Black Sea Front group of troops had not only to manage their troops, but also to solve serious organizational issues. For example, we formed 12 mountain batteries, a separate division on driftwood, an anti-aircraft division of PTRs, and the 14th Marine Division, with permission from Moscow, was deployed into the 305th Guards Mortar Regiment. Captain Kabolnikov's division from the 2nd GMP was completed with combat vehicles and transferred to the 67th GMP. The organization of new divisions for the 305th Regiment was facilitated by the availability of vehicles in our group. During the period of heavy defensive fighting in the Salsky steppes and on the Kuban, the vehicles of the Guards mortar regiments, moving to Stalingrad and Nalchik, also moved to the mountains with us. A great role in the restoration of motor transport and combat vehicles, a significant part of which, by decision of the Military Council of the front, went to staff the newly organized divisions, played our PRM. A great merit in this was due to the head of the PMA AA F. Alfarov and my deputy for artillery technical supply, Lieutenant Colonel I. A. Ivasyukov. All work in the workshop was carried out under the direction and with the direct participation of A. F. Alfarov. One day a combat vehicle in extremely dangerous condition was brought to the workshop on a tugboat. There were 6 shells that had not come off and had not exploded, which were jammed in the explosion. It was impossible to remove them, and consequently it was impossible to start repairing them. To blow up the shells would mean destroying the combat installation, but we could not lose the weapon. There was no ammunition specialist in the workshop, and no one could make a conclusion about the condition of the fuses of these shells, and so the head of the Alfarov himself took up this dangerous work. The installation was towed 100 meters away from the workshop. Alfarov, with a cap-wrench fuses, climbed on the installation, on one of the shells carefully put the key, and began to turn it. One wrong move and... But the fuse went easily. Now it was possible to unscrew it by hand, so removed all 6 fuses. Then in the same way from the missile chambers unscrewed the warheads of the shells. The rocket chambers themselves were knocked off the guides with an ordinary sledgehammer, putting a chump on the end of the chamber. The combat vehicle was restored. Repair of vehicles, which had been bruised by premature explosions of shells, was also extremely difficult. It was necessary to cut out pieces of guides, which were badly deformed during the explosion and could not be repaired. New guides were welded from the pieces, but 1 or 2 less than usual. Therefore, the launchers could now fire only a smaller number of shells. Our PRM developed a system of launching from shelter. This system was as follows: a pulley was installed instead of the helm of the fire control panel. A closed twine was thrown over it. At a distance of 10 to 15 meters from the installation, a slit was torn out. The twine was passed through the open window of the cabin door and stretched to the slot. The commander of the unit, hiding in the slot, pulled the twine, which rotated the pulley, made, at the suggestion of Alfarov, from tin cans with flared edges. The contacts of the electric start circuit were closed as usual. To keep the twine from flying off the pulley, a guide bracket was placed on the cabin door. This primitive, at first glance, system worked reliably and ensured complete safety. It was highly appreciated by the combat calculations. Moreover, it was in principle repeated by the factories that produced BM-13. Subsequently, we received both separate sets of such devices and installations equipped with them. However, the pulleys of the arriving vehicles were milled from metal. The figures eloquently testify to the combat activity of Katyusha divisions in the Caucasus Mountains. Thus, in October, November and December 1942, the Guards mortar units fired 22,892 shells. Needless to say, for mountainous conditions this is quite an impressive figure. Lieutenant General I.E. Petrov, commander of the Black Sea group of troops, was an exceptionally mobile man, determined, full of energy. He was almost continuously in the troops, delved into all the details of front life. To travel to the units he used all kinds of transport cars, airplanes, sea boats, railroad trolleys. In difficult places Ivan Efimovich moved on horseback or on foot. He was very agile and hardy. Sometimes we wondered when the commander rested. Since the Guard mortar units were available in all armies and operated in the main directions, the commander, when travelling to one or another army, almost always took me with him. One day we, with General Petrov on 2 all-terrain vehicles, made our way to the site of the 47th Army. On one of the ascents we came across the tail of a convoy. The weather was disgusting. It was drizzling fine rain. The commander in a raincoat got out of the car and quickly went forward. We, with the commander's lieutenant, hurried after him. A small fire was burning in a clearing away from the halted column. Around it sat the soldiers. "Hello, comrades," said hello to them commander. "Hello, comrade," A bass voice replied softly. "Can I warm myself by your fire?" Petrov asked. "Warm yourself, it's no pity," answered the same voice. "Why are you standing there and not moving on?" asked the general. "How do we know? They are ahead of us, and we are ahead of them." "You can't overtake them here," said the same voice. "They say there is a traffic jam on the mountain."
A car is stuck. They can't remove it, explained another fighter.
"And why are you sitting and not helping?" "There are enough people there without us. They're also commanders. Probably they are waiting for Petrov. He will clear the road for them quickly." "And who is Petrov?" Ivan Yefimovich asked. "Our new commander." "Haven't you heard? Must be angry?" inquired the general. "They say he's a tough man, but fair. He's on the front line day and night." "Well, thanks, guys, for the light. We must move," said Petrov. "Well, if you have to move, then move. You'll get through on foot," said the fighter who was tossing wet twigs into the fire confidently. And the other, pointing at Petrov, quietly asked the lieutenant, "Who will it be?" "That's Petrov," replied the lieutenant loudly, and the commander was already leaving quickly. We hurried after him. Bypassing car after car, we reached the head of the column. On a steep rise, almost at the top of the pass, one of the tankers with fuel first stalled, and then skidded backwards. With its left rear corner it now rested against a rock, and the right front wheel was almost hanging over the abyss. No matter how hard the men on the ropes tried to lift the car, all their efforts were in vain. The commander, looking at this, took a deep breath and said,
"There is only one way out. Tank must be pushed into the abyss. It is impossible to delay the movement because of it. Comrade Nestorenko, organize the work, and we will move on. There's no time."
With the help of officers in the column, I gathered a large enough group of fighters. But it was difficult to approach the cistern on the left a rock, on the right a cliff. "Why dump it?" suddenly asked one of the fighters. "It would be a pity for the car, and the fuel would be useful." "And what to do?" Several voices sounded at once. "It can be pulled out." "How?" "Very simple. We must gather the ropes tighter, hook one of them to the rear left corner of the tank and the other to the right front hook, and pull the cars and people to the stretch." The idea was clear, the advice sound. In just a few minutes the men brought the cables, tied them as recommended. When the cars and men pulled the cables, the front wheel jumped out of the cliff with relative ease, and the left corner of the tank moved away from the rock. The car started onto the road. When I reported to the commander how the traffic jam was eliminated, he immediately asked, "What's the name of the soldier?" But unfortunately I didn't know it. "But he deserves an award," said I. Petrov. "How much our soldier has wit, wisdom, practical experience. Truly heroic march through the rugged mountain roads made the 101st Division of Capt. D. Trofimov. It was a great merit of drivers and technicians. They managed to get chains somewhere and put them on all the vehicles. The drivers showed exceptional skill and squeezed everything possible and even impossible out of their half-trucks and 3-ton trucks, moving along very dangerous roads, where on one side a chasm and on the other a sheer cliff. The division fulfilled the combat task and with its fire provided invaluable assistance to the defending units. In the middle of October the enemy went on the offensive in the direction of Tuapse and captured Shomian. There were fierce battles for Elisavetpol Pass. The situation in the 18th Army was getting more and more difficult. Instead of Lieutenant General F.V. Kamkov, Major General A. Grechko took command. October 23rd, the enemy came to the mountains Samashko and Two Brothers, and his advanced units to the river Tuapsinka, which is 30 kilometers from Tuapse. As a result of measures taken by the command and heroic actions of our soldiers, further advancement of Hitlerites was suspended. In these battles, the artillery of the 18th Army and the Guards mortar units acted perfectly. In the report on the combat activity of the GMCH for October 1942, it is said for October 258 volleys were made by the units of the group. Only on the Tuapse direction 6,185 shells were fired, and 9,769 shells in total. The most active were the 14th, the 320th and 322nd Divisions, and the 1st Mountain Battery, which fired 1,016 shells at the enemy. For the convenience of managing units and providing them with ammunition in the armies were created subgroups of the SMF. Thus, in October in the 18th Army a subgroup was created consisting of the 320th, 321st, 322nd Divisions of the 67th GMP, 14th and 415th Divisions of the 305th GMP, 222nd Division of the 25th GMP, 48th OG8th OGMD, 1st and 2nd Mountain Battery. The subgroup was headed by the commander of the 67th GMP, Major A. Nozarev. In the 56th Army, the subgroup consisted of the 223rd and 224th Divisions of 25th GMP and 101st OGMD. The head of the subgroup was the commander of the 25th GMP, Major M. Rodichev. In the 47th Army, the subgroup consisted of the 57th and 58th Divisions of 8 GMP. It was headed by Lieutenant Colonel A.M. Lobanov. On December 12, 1942, the command decided to conduct a private operation to destroy the enemy grouping that had reached the mountains Indyuk and Simashko. The main role in this operation was to play 83rd Rifle Division of Colonel A. Luchinsky and 383rd Rifle Division of General K. I. Provalov. On the eve of the operation, Colonel A. Luchinsky and I was called by General I. Petrov. What forces GMCH we can support the offensive of the 383rd Rifle Division? Asked the General. I reported that on the site of the division we can concentrate 2 divisions of M13, 2 divisions of M8 and 3 mountain batteries. GMCH we plan to use this way. At 7 o'clock in the morning a salvo by all installations on the nearest areas of enemy concentration, at 7 hours 15 minutes a second salvo. At the same time, from 7.05 to 7.20, the 18th Army's long-range artillery group and part of the M13 batteries make fire raids on enemy artillery. From 10.30 to 11 o'clock, infantry support artillery and mortar batteries work the enemy's forward edge. At 10.45, the SMGs give the third salvo with M8 installations, and M13 installations transfer the fire to depth. Direct fire guns treat the front edge. At 11.00, the infantry goes on the attack. However, Salvas Katyusha put directly on the front edge we could not. Did not allow the location of our infantry. Artillery from closed positions also could not fire on the enemy's leading edge, as on the downward branch of trajectories shells hit the tops of trees and burst over our forward chains. The guns for direct fire were clearly insufficient. All this led to the fact that the front edge of the enemy defence we treated poorly. There was a cold, drizzling rain. Descents and ascents became slippery. The infantry was advancing slowly. During the day, our advanced units advanced only 300 to 500 metres. And yet, despite the enormous difficulties, in the following days our troops managed to push back the enemy behind the river Pyish. I made some conclusions for myself, which at the request of the commander of the Black Sea group of troops summarized in a report to his name. When choosing the direction of the main blow in the mountains, said in the report, should be based not on the configuration of the front line and the peculiarities of the terrain. The success of the case decides not the number of offensive and the quality of their training to act in mountain conditions, as well as the provision of communication and fire support for artillery. It is necessary to advance in stages, because on steep slopes the soldiers quickly get tired. It is impossible to use the fire of RS divisions, and especially M8, on the front line because of the large dispersion, and on fortified nodes because of the weak fugitive action is inexpedient. Massive RS fire is effective on objects located deep in the enemy's defence, on its suitable reserves rear headquarters. Therefore, aerial reconnaissance is extremely necessary. Artillery should be used concentrated on the main direction and not dispersed across the entire front. After reading my report, General Petrov said, "And yet the enemy has withdrawn behind the Pshish River. So the fire of the Guards' mortar units and artillery did their job."
That was good news. and it was followed by a second one.
General Oborenkov transmitted from Moscow, said the commander, that you have been awarded the rank of Major General. I congratulate you from the bottom of my heart.
And the commander shook my hand.
It is difficult to convey in words the feelings that swept over me. After all, it was the third rank I received for a year and a half of war, and I was then only 34 years old. By December 17th, the Semashko-Indyuk grouping of the enemy was liquidated. After that, on the front from Tuapse to Novorossiysk, the initiative passed into our hands. Parts of the 18th, 56th and 47th Armies were consistently on the offensive in different parts of the front, pushing the enemy. On February 10th, 1943, the troops of the North Caucasian Front reached Krasnodar. On February 11th, having forced the Kuban River, the 40th Motorized Rifle Brigade broke into Krasnodar. Supporting the offensive of our troops in the Krasnodar direction, in the Kuban plains came and Guards mortar units. These were the 67th and 305th Regiments, as well as the 48th and 101st separate divisions. The 8th Regiment remained near Novorossiysk with the troops of the 47th Army. An order was received from Moscow that the Guards mortar units of the Black Sea group of forces operating in the Krasnodar direction should be transferred to the task force of the GMF of the North Caucasus Front, commanded by General M.I. Dechyarev. Our meeting with M.I. Dechyarev in Lubinsk was joyful. We had a lot to remember and tell each other about, and when I returned to the headquarters of the Black Sea Group, I was informed that I had to leave for Moscow. Together with me recalled, and a member of the military council of our group GMCH Regimental Commissar M.I. Drozhoshin. I arrived in Moscow at the end of March. General V.V. Oborenkov received me kindly. He said that soon the headquarters of the Guards mortar units of the Black Sea group of troops of the North Caucasus Front, with a marching repair shop and artillery storage units, would arrive in Moscow. While you were sneaking along the district roads, the railroads were restored, and trains went from the south to Moscow. So in a few days you will meet your headquarters. Oborenkov was silent for a while and added, we called you to send you to Malinovsky again. The head of his task force is General Vozniuk. Vatutin asks to transfer Vozniuk to him. Malinovsky wants you to be the head of the task force of his front. What do you think of this proposal? I replied that I'm ready to go to Malinovsky. Vozniuk also agrees to go to Vatutin, said Oborenkov. However, the appointment and rearrangement of the heads of the operational groups of the GMCH fronts is made only with the permission of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Today, General Dechyarev and I will report our proposals to him. Tomorrow morning you will know the decision. The next day Oborenkov told me that Stalin did not approve their proposal. He ordered Vozniuk to remain in place, and I was appointed to the Bryansk front instead of Voivodin. Vozniuk knows his units and the situation at the front, said Stalin, so why make it so that before heavy fighting and Vozniuk and Nestorenko do not know their units and the situation? In this case, I ask our headquarters, artillery and PRM, to send to the Bryansk front, and Voivodin will work better with his staff at the new place. The solution to this issue is in our power, Oborenkov replied. Dechyarev added that for continuity expedient Chief of Staff of the group Voivodin Lieutenant Colonel V.I. Zadorin left in place, especially since the Chief of Staff GMCH Black Sea Group, Lieutenant Colonel G.V. Osmolovsky has already received a new appointment. A few days later, together with a member of the military council, Colonel I.N. Lomakovsky from the south arrived headquarters and logistics of the Black Sea Group. In Moscow we repaired vehicles, replaced the cars that had fallen into disrepair, received new ones, and at the end of April we left for the Bryansk front on our own. Before our departure, General Oborenkov told me, against the Kursk protrusion the enemy is preparing a powerful blow. Your front has a special place in the decisive counter-offensive. We are sending you a large number of shells, half of them heavy M30 and M20. Prepare your units for intense fighting. After the defeat and capture of Field Marshal Paulus's troops at Stalingrad, Hitler's command tried with all its might to regain the strategic initiative. For this purpose, a major offensive operation, called by the Nazis Citadel, was being prepared. The enemy's plan was to destroy by concentric blows from the north and from the south our troops, which were on the so-called Kursk Bulge, which was formed as a result of offensive operations of the Red Army in the winter of 1943. The best fascist divisions were pulled to the area of military operations. Hitler's command pinned special hopes on tank units, which had new powerful tanks of Panther, Tiger type and self-propelled guns Ferdinand. Nazi aviation received many new airplanes such as Focke-Wulf 190A and Heinkel 129. North and south of the Kursk protrusion, the enemy concentrated 50 selected divisions, including 16 tank and mechanized divisions, the 4th and 6th Air Fleets. In total, the Nazis had here about 900,000 soldiers and officers, up to 10,000 guns and mortars, 2,700 tanks and over 2,000 airplanes. On the eve of the offensive, Hitler, speaking before the senior staff of the Wehrmacht, said that during the entire war German troops were not more prepared for battles than at Kursk, and, as never before, equipped with a large number of heavy weapons. By that time, troops of the Voronezh and Central fronts had deployed on well-prepared lines, with the steppe front behind them.
The headquarters of the Bryansk front was located in Plavske, not far from Tula. There was also the headquarters of LM Voivodin. At that time the Bryansk front was commanded by Colonel General M. A. Reiter. His chief of staff was Lieutenant General L.M. Sandlov. The artillery commander was Major General A. Gusakov. Chief of staff of the Group GMCH Bryansk front, Lieutenant Colonel Zadorin, remained in place. He had all the necessary data on the state of the units, so I did not have to have long conversations with Voivodin.
The Task Force GMCH Bryansk front included the 2nd and 3rd Guards Mortar Divisions and a separate 8th Brigade M30, 6 separate regiments M13 and Division M8. The divisions and regiments already had combat experience. They participated in the Battle of Stalingrad. The divisions were armed with metal frame launchers instead of combat vehicles. Each brigade of 4 divisions had 288 launchers. The launch of a brigade was 1,152 shells, weighing over 106 tons. In total, there were 864 frames in the division, which could simultaneously fire 3,456 shells M30 to 320 tons. The M30 and M20 rockets were adopted for service in June 1942. At the same time, based on a decree of the State Defense Committee, several separate M30 divisions were formed, thus beginning the creation of heavy field rocket artillery. For the first time, M30 divisions began to operate on July 5, 1942 on the Western Front, on the 61st Army Section, near the town of Belyov, Tula region. The 68th and 69th Guards Mortar Regiments of 4 divisions fired volleys at fortified enemy resistance nodes in the villages of Anino and Verkhny Doltsy, using 1,536 shells. As a result, the resistance nodes were destroyed and occupied by our troops. M30 shells were highly appreciated by both General Army and artillery commanders. Here, on the Bryansk front, for the first time I had a chance to deal with brigades and divisions of heavy rocket artillery, which had a huge impact force of massive volley fire. A brigade could fire a volley of 1,152 shells in 5 minutes. However, it took 6 to 8 hours to prepare for it. The range of the M30 shells was 2.8 kilometers, that of the M314, and that of the M205 kilometers. The long time to prepare a salvo and the limited range of fire are significant disadvantages, but the huge destructive effect of the new shells more than covered them. The firepower of heavy field rocket artillery brigades was achieved by a massive salvo of shells of great destructive power. Exploding, such a shell left behind a crater 7 to 8 meters in diameter and up to 2.5 meters deep. In May 1943, the 2nd and 3rd Guards Mortar Divisions became part of the newly created Artillery Corps of the Breakthrough. These divisions were intended mainly to destroy resistance nodes in the enemy defense system. The 2nd Division became part of General P.M. Korolkov's 7th Artillery Corps, and the 3rd Division became part of General M.M. Barsukov's 2nd Artillery Corps. Separate regiments M13 and M8 were intended to support and accompany our troops deep in the enemy defences, its pursuit and repulsion of counterattacks. These regiments in the hands of General Army and artillery chiefs were manoeuvrable artillery means of massive fire attack, Such an organization and such use of SMF were dictated not only by the nature of the armament. It was required by the transition of our troops to offensive actions after Moscow, and especially Stalingrad. The strategic initiative was on our side. The importance attached to the formation of units armed with heavy rockets is evidenced by the Stavka Order of June 27, 1942, which instructed all heads of central departments of the People's Commissariat of Defense to provide the heavy rocket divisions being formed with personnel, weapons and vehicles. For our part, we bore great responsibility for the fact that such a powerful strike force was used wisely and effectively, so that expensive shells were not wasted. Especially dangerous were mistakes in the preparation of initial data for the salvo. That is why, familiarizing myself with the units, I was primarily interested in the field training of the command staff. Unfortunately, my fears were justified. It turned out that the field training of some of them was clearly lame. The situation with map orientation in unfamiliar terrain was especially bad. When I asked the commander of the 2nd Division, General A.F. Tvetsky, how prepared the command staff on shooting and artillery, Alexander Fedorovich shrugged his shoulders, looked at me perplexed, and then, after a little thought, said, "I believe that the commanders of divisions and batteries are prepared quite well. They all have combat experience. They are not fighting for the first day. Each division has a miniature polygons. Trainings are held when the situation allows. And besides, the best artillerymen are assigned to the division." "Let's still check," I answered him. "Gather the commanders of units, divisions, chiefs of staff. Let them have with them maps, tablets and everything necessary for the preparation of initial data." An hour later we were on the heights which we chose on the map. Having shown the officers where the front line was, what targets should be hit, and where the firing positions of our divisions were, I ordered to prepare the initial data for firing. Orientation was relatively easy. From the heights opened a wide panorama. In the distance we could see the forest and some groves. Near a large forest, a village. Gullies and small rivers flowing into the Oke River were clearly visible. In short, there were more than enough landmarks. Alexander Fedorovich and I leisurely prepared data for comparison. Back in the 30s, I was the head of the topographic detachment of an artillery regiment and therefore had good practice in orienteering on the terrain. And Tvetsky had a lot of experience. Therefore, for us to prepare control data on the map was not very difficult.
The importance of a topographic map in military affairs is difficult to overestimate. Topographic map at the front helps to plan and organize the interaction of all branches of the armed forces in operations, and in artillery and missile forces it is necessary for accurate fire and reliable support of troops in battle. Map allows you to get an idea in advance about the nature of the routes of movement of troops, about the conditions in which the battle will have to be fought, and which must be taken into account in order to achieve success or prevent any surprises. Not having a map in battle is like acting blindly, at random.
And yet, strange as it may seem, sometimes insufficient attention was paid to topographical training, and at the same time, the inability to quickly navigate or careless attitude to the study of the terrain on the map in frontline conditions sometimes led to fatal mistakes. Each officer, having completed the task, handed the sheet with the initial data to General Tvetsky, who noted the time. The first to finish calculations were brigade commanders N.S. Zhetaruk and A.V. Mikhailov, followed by the regiment commander V.A. Plotnikov. The rest, not meeting the allotted time, visibly worried. Finally received all the calculations. We compared them. The results were discouraging, large discrepancies and gross errors. General Tvetsky felt uncomfortable. "How can it be, comrade officers?" I had to say, summarizing the results. "You know as well as I do what will happen if you give a volley prepared with such gross mistakes. Either you will waste expensive shells and fail to fulfill the combat task, or you will hit your own. What could be more terrible than this?" Officers, feeling their guilt, silently looked at me, then at the division commander. General Tvetsky with annoyance dropped. "Yes, the matter is clear. The proper attention to field training did not pay. Alexander Fedorovich, we must immediately begin training in the field in unfamiliar terrain. Commanders must urgently master practical techniques of orientation, learn to quickly, and most importantly, unmistakably determine on the map of their location and location of targets. Fortunately, we still had time, and in a week and a half or 2 weeks we managed to eliminate this gap. In general, the state of the Guards units and formations that were part of the front's operational group made a good impression on me. They were well staffed with both personnel and military equipment. At that time, the artillery warehouses of the front had already brought enough ammunition, 58,000 shells. Now the task was to prepare as best as possible for the upcoming battles. The issues of combat readiness of units, their training, were always in the center of our attention. The Bryansk and Western fronts were preparing for a decisive counter-offensive. In the first days of June, instead of General M.A., Reiter Colonel General M.M.M. Popov took command of the Bryansk front, and instead of General A. Gusakov, Lieutenant General of Artillery N.V., Gavrilenko arrived, with whom we had been familiar since March 1942 on the Southern Front. The new commander was tireless. He constantly travelled from army to army, familiarized himself with the troops, studied the terrain of the upcoming battles. Going to this or that army, he took with him and me and Gavrilenko to check the readiness of artillery units and the organization of interaction with infantry and tanks. At the headquarters of the armies in the forest glades were built models of the area of the upcoming combat operations. On these models, with the commanders of formations and heads of branches of troops, clarified the plans of interaction during the offensive, determined the boundaries of the immediate and subsequent tasks, as well as fire support for the advancing troops. Preparing for the offensive, our troops were improving the defensive lines in the rear of the armies. It was necessary to be ready for any surprises. Having taken command of the Guards mortar units of the Bryansk front, I, of course, began to look at their commanders and political workers. I was to go into battle with them. On what they were capable of, depended in many respects the success of the combat operations of the SMM in the upcoming operations. I became more and more convinced that regiments, brigades, and divisions were in good hands. Each commander had a lot of experience gained in previous battles. Such were division commanders General A.F. Tveretsky, Colonel P.V. Kolesnikov, brigade commanders Colonel N.S. Jezeruk, Lieutenant Colonels A.P. Mikhailov, Makreselishkov, regiment commanders Colonel K.G. Serdobolsky, Lieutenant Colonels Varplotnikov, D.N. Orlov, G.F. Zuravlev, N.M. Kovchur, Nevada Skurda. Nikita Vasilievich Skurda commanded the 312th Guards Mortar Regiment. His regiment was formed in 1942 in Moscow and participated in the battles of Stalingrad. And tormented me all sorts of thoughts on the way to the Stalingrad front, Skurda confided in me when we met. Regiment, you can say, Komsomol. Only division commanders and some battery commanders had combat experience, and most of them were untrained young people. And here we had a very harsh winter. Will they withstand? The thought of it did not give me peace. The young guardsmen did not fail. 43 people in these battles earned orders and medals. After the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, the regiment was completed, the combat vehicles were repaired, and in April of the 43rd was transferred to the Bryansk front. Soon Major Artem Seionovich Stupin arrived from Moscow to the post of the deputy commander of the 312th Regiment on the political part. When Lomakovsky and I saw him for the first time in Plavsky, in his headquarters, both of us involuntarily had the same thought: will they work together with Skurda? The new deputy commander seemed very shy to us. And Skurda? He was hot-tempered, irascible, harsh, even rude in his speeches and actions. In addition, narcissistic and reacts painfully to comments. But we knew Skurda from the other side. His business qualities were excellent. We also knew that this courageous man has a kind, responsive heart. Lomakovsky and I had a frank conversation with Stupin about all this, but he kept silent and smiled faintly. And when we expressed our apprehension, the major said, Nikita Vasilievich I know still on the fights on Kok in goal, and his character there recognized. When I was offered to be his deputy, I agreed without hesitation. I think we'll do well. Stupin arrived in Skurdy's regiment, having a wealth of experience in party political work. Artem Seionovich was born in 1905 in Siberia. In 1922 he became a Komsomol member and in the detachment of Chon fought with White Guard gangs in the Amur region. Since 1928, he served in the Amur flotilla on the gunboat Red Banner. Here he joined the party, was elected secretary of the party organization of the gunboat. In the 29th, during the conflict on the Sel, he participated in battles with the White Chinese. For courage, he was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Stupin was elected a member of the plenum of the Khabarovsk Regional Committee of the party. In 1930, the communists of the separate Red Banner Far East Army, which was commanded by V.K. Blucher, sent Stupin delegate to the ex-VI Congress of the party. For the fighting on Khalkhin-Gol, he was awarded the Order of the Red Star and the Mongolian Order of the Red Banner. Stupin, as we soon had the opportunity to see, perfectly knew the combat equipment, excelled in shooting from personal weapons. The commander of the 4th Tank Army awarded him a personal gun for first place in shooting competitions. When one day our troops captured a warehouse with Faust patrons, Stupin quickly studied the trophy weapons and helped others to do it. Trophy Faust patrons went into action on Stupin's initiative. They were armed with special anti-tank groups, which covered their divisions attached to tank corps. Stupin had an excellent understanding of people. He skillfully began to cluster in the regiment party and Komsomol activists. Party political work in the divisions has improved markedly. Artem Seionovich was sensitive and attentive to the soldiers, and they opened their hearts to him. Before him, we didn't know that many guardsmen of the regiment had their relatives and friends tortured by fascists or taken into captivity. One day I came to the regiment and found such a picture. Guardsmen were gathered in a forest clearing under century-old spruce trees. I was told that there was a rally. Sergeant Polovoy was speaking before the soldiers and officers. As soon as the Nazis entered the village, they immediately shot my brother for being a Komsomol member, and another, the youngest, was driven into fascist slavery. At Klimovich, fascists tortured his father. At Evstratenko, they killed his uncle and took his sister to Germany. At Shekman, they mutilated his father and killed his 6-year-old brother. At Morozov, they killed 2 little nephews. At Rastupin, Hitlerites executed his sister, a Komsomol member, and at Koplenko, his 70-year-old father. At Grybov's mother, father and wife died of hunger in fascist captivity. There were 120 people in the regiment, whose families suffered from the fascists. With pain and anger spoke soldiers about atrocities of fascist occupants on the Soviet land. Their stories filled their hearts with hatred to the enemy, called for a merciless fight. In preparation for the upcoming battles, the political department of the regiment provided great assistance to the party and Komsomol organizations of units. I still remember the lines of the memo to the communist and Komsomol member, written by Stupin. It called to be faithful to the oath and the Guard's oath, to hold high the honor of the Guard's banner. Stupin did a lot to ensure that the propaganda work in the regiment was linked to the concrete affairs of the front life of units. This modest, thoughtful organizer did not seem to be seen. No loud words were heard from him, but the results of his labor were felt everywhere. His sound advice, principled assessment of the phenomena, he helped the regiment commander. Observing how the relationship between them, I involuntarily recalled the names of Chapayev and Fermanov, relationship Skurda and Stupin. Their joint work in many ways repeated this classic example. Both the regiment commander and his deputy were in the units from dawn to dawn, teaching, controlling, demanding. There was hard and persistent work to prepare units for the coming intense battles. Under the influence of Artem Seionovich, Skurda became calmer, more balanced. In short, contrary to our fears, the combination of their experience and characters gave excellent results. The commander of the 312th Regiment was a man of action. It was not in his character to sit idly by. From him there were constant reports of targets on which he asked permission to make night fire raids by roaming installations and batteries. The tactic of surprise night raids was approved by the front command and was widely used by other units. It exhausted the enemy, kept him in suspense. I remember on June 18th, intelligence reported that at the station Antiaircraft appeared enemy train. The salvo was given precisely. We watched with joy as the wagons were burning, ammunition was bursting. 8 tanks and a lot of living force of fascists were destroyed. A few days later, to the west of Msensk, scouts noticed the movement of enemy vehicles. Hitlerites were transporting something at night. The scouts were given the task to find out what was going on there. They found an ammunition depot and established its coordinates. After a precise battery volley, explosions were heard. Half of the sky was covered with a glow that burned for 6 hours. Comrade General. At the village of Shashkino, the fascists got quite brazen. Skerda reported to me. They go to the river Zusha to fetch water. On Sundays they get drunk and sing songs. We must calm them down. Permission. I gave him permission. On Sunday night, the guardsmen took 2 fighting vehicles to the prepared positions and carefully camouflaged them. In the middle of the day, Hitlerites, as usual, began to come out of trenches and trenches. They were already drunk and were singing songs. After salvos of both installations, concerts of the enemies stopped. The troops of the front were intensively preparing for offensive battles. Prepared and guards mortar units. It was necessary to reconnoitre routes, to choose reserve firing positions and observation posts. They should have been equipped, not only in the offensive lines of the supported formations, but also in the areas of other armies. After all, each Katyusha division could go to any section of the front at the first command. The enemy was constantly monitored. In these days I, a member of the military council of the group, Colonel Lomakovsky, and Chief of Staff Colonel Zadorin, had to be in the units for long periods of time, checking their combat readiness, linking and clarifying the plans of interaction with artillery and infantry. The Guards mortar units of the front were located in a strip up to 300 kilometers wide. Such dispersion required a special style of leadership and hard work of the headquarters. All of us were in constant travel. For many days from day to day we had to overcome the distance of 200-300 kilometers, and sometimes more. On the front roads day and night travelled communications officers, unit commanders, staff. The performance of tasks by the Guards mortar units depended to a great extent on the drivers of combat, transport, special vehicles and all-terrain vehicles. Drivers, toilers of the front roads. They were the ones who in the autumn slow and winter blizzard, under bombing and artillery fire, under rifle and machine gun fire, tirelessly drove the vehicles, carrying out orders. If we talk about the mobility of units, about quick transfers of regiments and brigades in a limited time to long distances on difficult roads, the main merit in this are drivers. And the better drivers were selected and trained in the units, the better these units fulfilled combat tasks. When we talk about heroic actions of our batteries, lightning-fast trips of combat vehicles, to open combat positions and crushing volleys of direct fire, it is impossible not to remember the drivers of the vehicles. During the combat operations of the GMCH on the Bryansk front, the artillery depot motor companies and combat supply platoons of the units transported more than 150,000 bulky rocket shells to hundreds of kilometers to the firing positions. I remember with deep gratitude chauffeurs Vanya Osipov, Ivan Ivanovich Belikov, Vanya Vorotnikov, and many others. After all, in the Guards mortar units more than 20% of the personnel were drivers of combat, transport and special vehicles. Only thanks to the courage of drivers, their ability to quickly assess the situation, to maneuver masterfully, to change the direction of movement in time, to hide in a dell or a forest, to quickly skip a dangerous place, or to wait for some seconds, many of us, who were driving day and night on the front roads, avoided seemingly imminent death. I remember a bright sunny day. Our Willys stood near the NP, camouflaged with branches. It was urgent to go to the headquarters. When we got on the road and the driver Ivan Ivanovich Belikov gave full throttle, the snagged twig drummed unpleasantly on the bottom. I was tired of listening to this music. Ivan Ivanovich, I turned to him, stop, throw out that damn rod. Belikov braked sharply. However, instead of getting out of the car, he squinted his eyes, stared intensely at the sun, and suddenly shouted loudly. We are being dive-bombed. Bombs are flying. Now I saw 2 enemy planes, from which black dots of bombs separated. Jump into the ditch, I commanded. No sooner had we spread out in the ditch than powerful explosions were heard ahead. Clods of thrown earth fell near us. The road ahead was shrouded in smoke and dust. Enemy attack aircraft roared over us, firing machine guns. Everything went quiet as instantly as it had begun. Shaking off the dust, we were glad to be alive. Thank you. Ivan Ivanovich, for spotting the planes in time, I said. You should not thank me, Comrade General, but the twig. If it hadn't been for him, we would have driven right under the bombs. I will keep it until the end of the war. And Ivan Ivanovich pulled out a birch twig from under the car and carefully put it under the seat. By the spring of 1943, the Guards' mortar units had already acquired sufficient combat experience, organisationally strengthened, and grew into a powerful firepower. Fire output of one salvo of any division of reactive artillery was 12 to 16 times higher than the fire output of divisions of barrel artillery. And with regard to the application of sudden massive high-density fire, rocket artillery had no equal among other types of artillery. April 29, 1943, by decision of the State Defense Committee, the Guards' mortar units were transferred to the operational subordination of the commander of the Red Army Artillery Marshal of Artillery N.N. Voronov. The isolation of management and supply was still preserved, as the central management bodies of the GMCH and operational groups of the fronts successfully coped with their tasks. The decision of the GKO promoted closer interaction of the Guards' mortar units with artillery units, and at the same time obliged the artillery commanders of the fronts and armies to carefully study the peculiarities of the combat use of SMF, to know their condition. Such organizational measures gradually prepared the necessary conditions for combining the SMM with artillery. Lieutenant General Pardejairov, who had previously been a member of the Military Council of the SMF, was appointed commander of the Guards' mortar units of the Red Army, his deputy Major General P.N. Kulshov, a member of the Military Council Major General L.L.M. Gaidukov. They headed the GMCH until the end of the war. In the early days of July, going to the Central Front, we were visited by the deputy commander of the GMCH Major General P.N. Kulishov. With Pavel Nikolaevich Kulishov, now Marshal of Artillery, we were acquainted since 1925 at the Tomsk Artillery School, which we graduated from in 1929. From 1930 to 1935, we also served there as course commanders, and then as Assistant Chief of Staff of the division and battery commanders. Our friendship was cemented by common hobbies. Both of us were engaged in athletics, skiing and equestrian sports. Pavel Nikolaevich was also an excellent gymnast, was fond of gliding, to which he introduced me. Having familiarized himself with the state of affairs in our group, Pavel Nikolaevich told me that the enemy had concentrated many tank, infantry and aviation units against the Central and Voronezh fronts. We must assume that the Central and Voronezh fronts will face especially hard battles, he said. Now, decades later, we can judge the distribution of forces and the course of hostilities in those grandiose battles. Back then, much was unknown to us. Leaving, P.N. Kulyoshov warned me to keep our units in the highest combat readiness. Special attention, Alexei Ivanovich, to the left flank of your front. He emphasized. Yes, I thought, seeing Pavel Nikolaevich off, soon the calm will be over, the calm before the storm. On the morning of July 5th, the Battle of Kursk began. After artillery preparation, the enemy moved thousands of tanks and self-propelled guns to our positions. Soviet tanks and anti-tank artillery were advancing to meet them. The rumble of artillery cannonade, volleys of Katyusha, the noise of the engines of stormtroopers, bombers and fighters, all this merged into a continuous rumble. I was on the left wing of the Bryansk front. Distant thunder rumbles reached us. In those days we were reading with intense attention operational reports about the events at the Kursk Bulge. Holding our breath, we listened to the radio reports of the Sovinform Bureau. The advancement of enemy troops in the first days of the battle caused alarm. On the left wing of the Bryansk front, the enemy also went on the offensive. After 45 minutes of artillery preparation under the cover of a smoke screen, German units began to advance in the area of Berezyanka, Dorogoye, Alexandrovka. In the first hours of the battle, Hitlerites managed to squeeze the units of the 41st Rifle Division of the 63rd Army. In some areas, the enemy infantry and tanks penetrated 2-3 kilometers into the depth of our defense. In the strip of the 63rd Army was the 313th Guards Mortar Regiment of Major D.N. Orlov. This regiment supported the defence of the 287th Infantry Division and was in wait and see positions. As soon as Orlov learned of the beginning of the enemy offensive in the neighbouring area, He, without waiting for the command, on his own initiative declared the regiment alert. Captain Ignatov's division was sent to the site of the neighbouring 41st Infantry Division, where the battle was already underway, Captain Pavlenko's division to the site of the 287th Infantry Division. The 3rd Division remained in reserve. Division NU, Ignatov, with which left the deputy commander of the regiment, Major M. Kolomiets, had previously scouted routes and selected firing positions. After 45 minutes he, having made a 30-kilometre march, took the battle order and at 7:00 gave a volley on the attacking enemy infantry. The unexpected salvo of Katyusha caused confusion in the ranks of the enemy. By 12:00 on July 5th from fire of Katyushas, and artillery Hitlerites lost not less than 600 people and withdrew to the initial positions. In the following days the fascists did not take any active actions in this area. On July 9th the troops of the Central Front stopped the Hitlerites' offensive, who had penetrated into the depth of our defence for 10-12 kilometres. I felt calmer. It seemed that the enemy began to exhale. And in July we already knew that on the Voronezh front the enemy offensive was stopped. There, at the cost of colossal losses, the fascists managed to advance 35 kilometres. Deputy Supreme Commander-in-Chief Marshal of the Soviet Union G.K. Zhukov arrived to us at the Bryansk front. It was our time to go on the counter-offensive. According to the plan of the Stavka, the troops of the Bryansk front were to break through the enemy defences in 3 places on the right wing of the front on the 61st Army of General P. Belov in the centre on the 3rd Army of General A. V. Gorbatov, and on the left wing of the front on the 63rd Army of General V. Y. Kolpaksha. Troops of the 61st Army struck at Bolkov, and troops of the 3rd and 61st Armies at Oral. In accordance with the plan of artillery support of the Breakthrough Guards mortar units were distributed as follows: 61st Army was supported by the 2nd Division, 310th and 311th Regiments, 3rd Army 8th Brigade, 85th and 312th Regiments, 63rd Army 3rd Division, 313th and 93rd Regiments. In order not to prematurely disclose the direction of the main blow of our troops, the withdrawal of units to the area of combat orders was made only at night, on the eve of the offensive. Some regiments had to march up to 100 kilometres. By the beginning of the operation, all regiments had a stock of shells for 12 salvos, and brigades for 2. July 11th, GMCH regiments together with artillery supported the combat operations of reconnaissance battalions, and on July 12th began the artillery offensive, which involved 2 artillery corps of the Breakthrough and a separate artillery division. Guards mortar units were used in the most critical areas, intensifying the fire of artillery. After a powerful artillery preparation, breaking through the enemy's defence in all 3 areas, our units went on the offensive. The troops of the Bryansk front had to break through the heavily fortified and deeply echeloned defence of the Germans, which was created during a year and a half. It was especially strong in the Bolkov direction, in the offensive line of the 9th Guards Rifle Corps of the 61st Army. The front edge of the fascist defence passed along the eastern outskirts of Krutogori, Tolkachev, Krivtsov 1 and further along the Oka River. The enemy turned these settlements into powerful resistance nodes, saturated with firepower. Inside the defensive strip were wire barriers, minefields, hollows and ditches, a well-organised system of anti-tank fire. The depth of the defensive strip reached 15 to 20 kilometres. On the right steep bank of the Oka stretched the village of Tolkachevo. The Oka in these places is shallow fast. The left bank all in golden sands. The village Tolkachevo was turned by Hitlerites into a powerful knot of resistance. Here 112th and 208th Infantry Divisions of the enemy were defending. Enemy soldiers and officers were in dugouts and shelters with a cover of 12 to 15 logs, covered with earth. The trenches had numerous passages of communication. In our hands was a small bridgehead on the left bank of the Oka. From it on July 11th was conducted reconnaissance by combat, which once again confirmed the strength of the Tolkachevsky junction. Combat actions of reinforced reconnaissance detachments, despite strong tank and artillery support, were not successful. But Tolkachevo is the key to Bolkov. Without destroying the Tolkachevo stronghold, the 61st Army could not take Bolkhov. Artillery support of the offensive in this section of the front was entrusted to the 7th Artillery Corps of the Breakthrough, commanded by General P.M. Korolkov. M. Korolkov. Battle reconnaissance showed that Tolkachevo is a tough nut and in a relatively short time of artillery preparation will not be able to destroy the facilities there. It was decided to attract the 2nd Guards Mortar Division of General Tveretsky to destroy the Tolkachevo resistance node. But immediately a question arose how to transfer all 3 of its brigades here in 24 hours, and so that they had time to take up firing positions. The right bank is high. From it the enemy could see our defences quite deeply. At the same time, the range of the M30 is only 2.8 kilometres, so the firing position should be chosen 1.5 to 2 kilometres from the front line. The task is not easy. For a few hours of a short summer night it was necessary to transfer all the equipment, more than 500 tons of shells. Under the nose of the enemy had to run about 300 vehicles. And all this was to be done discreetly. Otherwise the enemy could cover the brigades with mortar and artillery fire and prevent them from accomplishing the combat task. The commanders of brigades and divisions climbed all the gullies and ravines, choosing convenient firing positions and ways of access to them. In the afternoon, General Tveretsky and I checked the readiness of the selected positions. At 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 brigades of the division were to give a volley on Tolkachevsky Junction, the 3rd on Krutogoryi. The duration of the volley up to 20 minutes. It was assumed that during this time our forward infantry battalions would see for themselves where the line of fire was and come close to the firing rampart. Officers with communications equipment went to the forward battalions from the brigades. And again we are with General Tveretsky at the firing positions. Now we are already checking how prepared for the volley arrived units. In the location of the 17th Brigade of Colonel N.S. Zhezaruk, in a hollow we came across a group of soldiers who were being told something by a senior lieutenant. Seeing us, he fell silent, preparing to give a command. Tveretsky stopped him with a gesture. "What is it about, guardsman?" he asked. "The day before yesterday I was in my native land," answered the senior lieutenant. "Our village was recaptured from the enemy in winter. Here I tell about what the villagers and my mother saw and experienced." Senior Lieutenant V.S. Gavrilin was a battery commander. In the village of Mishina Polyana he grew up, and in the town of Belyov before the war he graduated from high school. In the first days of the war he went to a military school. In 42nd already fought at Stalingrad. Half of houses were burnt down, he told with anger. People were hiding in forests, in dugouts. Hitlerites drove many into slavery. My mother miraculously survived. When she saw me, she cried bitterly, and through her tears she said, "I bless you, my son, to fight. Beat them without mercy. They are beasts, not men. Drive them away from their native land, I'll fulfill my mother's command." He said resolutely, "Let me die, but the enemy will have no mercy from me." Gavrilin fulfilled his mother's order with honour. With his battery he reached Berlin on April 27, 1945. His battery, as the best in the brigade, gave a salvo on the Reichstag. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, the battery as part of the 17th Brigade was transferred to the Far East, and there, near Mukden, it gave the Japanese militarists its last salvo in the Second World War. By dawn the brigades were ready for battle. The morning of July 12th. There is still fog over the OK, but the sun is already rising. Silence. As if there was no war. At exactly 5 o'clock the command is given fire. That morning, for the first time, I was able to observe the fire of a heavy division of rocket artillery. Even for me, an artilleryman, it made a tremendous impression. Here and there from the ravines with a deafening roar packs of shells flew out. They crossed the sky with their bright tails of fire, and in a few seconds huge black fountains of bursts exploded one after another in the enemy's position. With every moment their density increased. After a while a huge blue-black cloud was formed over Tolkachev and Krutogoryi, on which lay the orange glow of the sun's rays. From simultaneous explosions of dozens and hundreds of shells of 300mm caliber the ground rumbled and shuddered continuously. In the rumble of the cannonade could not be heard neither commands nor the delighted exclamations of nearby comrades. The forward chains of our infantry came out of the trenches and moved forward. Only now did we appreciate the fact that the brigade's fire had been stretched in time. This allowed our forward battalions to settle in. They could now approach the wall of bursting fire with relative ease. In the best part of the brigade dispersion ellipses, the density of fire reached 30 to 50 ruptures per hectare. Hitler's resistance node was literally dotted with deep craters. All its fortifications were destroyed and destroyed. When our fighters, after the artillery fire shaft, went into attack, the surviving fascists ran in our direction with raised hands and shouted in horror, "Hitler kaputt." Hitler kaputt. The sight of them, stunned and maddened, was horrible. A captured officer of the 208th Infantry Division, which was defending the Tolkachev Junction, said it was a frenzied fire. Not a single dugout, not a single firing point was left. We were seized with horror. There was no place where the shells would not lie down. It's a wonder I survived. I was very lucky to have been captured. He was echoed by a captured soldier after the Katyusha salvo. Few of the 120 men in our company survived, and one of the 5 machine guns was left. All 5 heavy mortars were smashed to pieces. On Tolkachevsky Junction was fired 5,184 rockets, of which 3,456 M30 and 1,728 M20. In 18 minutes after the salvo of brigades, our troops, almost without losses, seized this important stronghold. The enemy did not offer any resistance. For a year and a half the fascists had been creating the Tolkachev fortified junction. 18 minutes it took our troops to take it. This blow clearly revealed one of the main qualities of heavy divisions, the crushing power of their volley fire. The experience of subsequent battles showed that where the necessary density of fire was created, any stronghold, no matter how fortified it was destroyed in a very short time by the volleys of the brigades. Unfortunately, the short range of fire did not allow us to destroy strongholds deep in the enemy's defences, and there were no artillery guns of great power on this section of the front. The enemy clung tenaciously to the intermediate lines, to every pillbox and bunker, to every trench. He threw up tank and infantry reserves. The advance of our units was slowing down more and more. Then the 2nd Guards Division was ordered to cross to the right bank of the Oka River and on July 13th to give volleys on the resistance nodes Bagrinovo, Komyakovo, Kurasovo. The division successfully accomplished the task and ensured the further advance of our troops. Soon a member of the Military Council of the GMC, Major General L.M. Gaidukov, came to us. "What if we allocate from the brigades small groups of machines to accompany the infantry?" he asked. I will not hide, the proposal puzzled us after all. It went against the capabilities of this type of reactive artillery. It is quite difficult to prepare the machines for combat, and they are bulky. However, we still decided to try to take a risk. The next day, groups of 2 to 4 M30 machines appeared in the fighting order of the 12th and 72nd Guards Rifle Divisions. The machines were installed in the folds of the terrain. They gave 12 volleys. After that, Gaidukov's idea found enthusiastic support among the commanders of the forward infantry units. "Inspire the troops, your volleys." The commander of one of the rifle regiments of the 72nd Guards Division told us with delight. When the bursts are successfully placed, the enemy suffers heavy losses. We asked to encourage the guardsmen of the batteries commanded by Senior Lieutenants Belov and Gavrilin. Well done. Wonderfully fight. And indeed, all the personnel of these batteries worked selflessly and heroically on the battlefield. Lieutenants I, Grishin L. Troshin, Sergeants I, Lesnikov V. Orlov V., Vladimirov and others skillfully installed launching machines, brought heavy shells to them. Their travelling frames made crushing salvos on the enemy. Senior Lieutenants Belov, Gavrilin and their guardsmen were honoured with government awards. The author of the proposal of itinerant frames, General Gaidukov himself, found suitable positions for the machines and targets for them. On the outskirts of Bolkov, I managed with great difficulty to take him to cover from under the enemy's rifle and machine gun fire. "Lev Mikhailovich, you and the commander scold us for excessive risk and deviation from instructions, while you yourself, risking no less, put M30 machines in the front lines of the infantry. Gaydukov smiled. You are certainly right, but this is a battle. Such use of M30s is simply necessary at this moment. I think it would be better to have M30s on vehicles, that is, maneuverable, I said. We are working in this direction. And it is true in 1944, such 12-round units were created for M31 shells, which had a range of 4 kilometers. They were called BM3112. In the same year, they came into service with brigades. The troops of the 61st Army fought hard in the Bolkov direction. Rifle Division, supported by the 311th Guards Mortar Regiment of Lieutenant Colonel G.F. Surovleva, was tasked to cut the important highway Bolkov-Orel. The enemy threw fresh reserves against the division. They included 2 infantry regiments, more than 50 Tigers and Ferdinands. The battle broke out in the early morning of July 19th, near the village of Kalinivo. The fascists at any cost wanted to seize the dominating height northwest of the village above the highway. There was nothing to repel the enemy attacks. The artillery of the division had almost no shells. The anti-tank brigade had not yet arrived, although it was already supposed to be here. With an ominous clanking and grinding came out of the nearby grove Tigers and Ferdinand. Behind them moved the enemy infantry. There was no time for reflection. Lieutenant Colonel Zhuravlev decided to cut off the Nazi infantry from the tanks by fire from closed positions to hit the tanks and the infantrymen who broke through with direct fire. The salvo on the living force was devastating. Tanks, left without gunners, slowed down. And then the BM-13 installations began to go one by one to direct fire, corrected the Fire Chief of Intelligence Regiment Senior Lieutenant Tatarnikov. The fire of artillery and Katyusha did not allow the enemy to build up the blow. Soon came up and our anti-tank brigade, which entered the battle from the start. The division continued the offensive. The village of Kalinivo was taken. The enemy left on the battlefield 24 tanks and up to 3 battalions of infantry. 6 hours lasted this fierce battle. After it, the division commander himself arrived at the NP Zhuravlev, shook his hand firmly, congratulated him on his success, and said, "Thank you, Guardsmen. If it weren't for your Katyushas, we would have had a hard time." In the July and August offensive of the Bryansk front, the Guards mortar units were used, as a rule, to break through the enemy's defences, to strike a massive blow to resistance nodes in new directions and intermediate defensive lines. For this purpose, they were quickly and promptly transferred from one army to another, often over long distances. A characteristic operation in this respect was carried out on the night of July 19th, when 4 heavy brigades and 4 regiments of Katyushas were transferred to the section of the Third Army. Under the onslaught of the troops of our Third Army, the enemy, providing stubborn resistance, by the end of the day on July 18th withdrew to the boundary of Panama, Alexandrovka, and further along the Oleshny River and consolidated on the previously prepared boundary. In order not to give him the opportunity to pull up fresh reserves, it was necessary to organize the breakthrough of the second strip as quickly as possible. Therefore, the front command decided to break through the Hitlerites' defences on the night of July 19th, 1943, and to bring the 3rd Guards Tank Army into this breakthrough. To ensure the breakthrough in the 3rd Army's band, the Guards mortar units from the left flank of the 63rd Army were urgently transferred there. The most difficult task turned out to be for the 3rd Guards Mortar Division of Colonel V. Kolesnikov, which since July 16th had been in firing positions on the 63rd Army section. Now the division had to withdraw from firing positions within 24 hours, make a 100-kilometre march, and by the morning of July 19th be ready to volley at a new location. Despite the extremely limited time, the 3 brigades made a night march and by 4:00 a.m., on July 19th were ready for battle. That same night, the 8th Independent Guards Mortar Brigade M30 and 4 regiments of M13 arrived here. Control over the transfer of units and the organisation of the regulation service was carried out by officers of the group headquarters and division headquarters. At the appointed time, all regiments and brigades made a powerful fire attack. The fascist command did not assume that in such a short time we can concentrate so much artillery in the area of the breakthrough. The fire ram literally led the enemy into confusion. Throwing weapons, Hitlerites in panic fled, and having lost orientation, fell under heavy fire of our infantry, surrendered as prisoners. The troops of the Third Army, after artillery preparation and volleys of Katyusha, captured a number of settlements: Novaya Zizn, Maloyachkasovo, Alexandrovka, Prilapy, Podmaslovo, and others, and the Third Guards Tank Army entered the breakthrough and began to successfully develop the offensive. On July 22, 1943, the enemy managed to gain a foothold on a new intermediate line of defense. The advance of our infantry divisions was suspended. Colonel Kolesnikov received the task in cooperation with artillery to ensure the breakthrough of the enemy defense line. He assigned this task to the 18th Guards Mortar Brigade. Within 3 hours it passed 40 kilometers, took firing positions, and at the right time fired a volley. Engineering structures in the Hitlerites' defense strip were destroyed, and most of the manpower was destroyed. Rifle units developed the offensive and captured a number of settlements: Kapurino, Solovki, Semyonov. The enemy lost up to a regiment of infantry. Breaking the enemy's defences, repelling counterattacks, destroying his reserves and retreating columns, the Guards mortar units of the Front Operational Group only in July 1943 fired more than 60,000 rockets, of which 29,000 heavy-caliber M20 and M30. On August 5 in Moscow, for the first time a salute in honour of the victories won by the troops of the Western, Bryansk, Central, Voronezh and Steppe fronts, which liberated Oral and Belgorod. On August 18, the liquidation of the Oral bridgehead of the enemy was completed. The troops of the Bryansk front, in cooperation with the Western and Central fronts, continued the offensive. With the expansion of our offensive line, the 11th Guards Army of General I. X. Bagraman and the 11th Army of General I. Fedyuninsky, and then the 50th Army of General I. V. Boldin moved from the Western Front to the Bryansk front. With the troops of these armies, 6 regiments of Katyusha joined the task force of the GMCH front, and the 3rd Guards Mortar Division was transferred to another front. Thus, in August 1943, in the operational group of the SMHR Bryansk front, there were 12 regiments, 4 brigades and 1 separate division. In subsequent battles of the newly arrived regiments of the most proactive 40th Guards Mortar Regiment of Major A. G. Karasia, which supported the 169th Infantry Division. Interacting with the artillery, he with his fire repulsed counterattacks and suppressed the flank fire of the enemy, ensuring the advance of the division. Many soldiers of this regiment distinguished themselves in the battles. Among them, the commander of the 39th Division, Captain A. M. Golosov, commander of the firing platoon, Lieutenant Karsanov, commander of the combat vehicle Abdulmanov. Bravely and selflessly acted 74th Guards Mortar Regiment of Guards Major A. V. Dazarides, which supported the 8th Guards Rifle Corps, which liberated more than 100 settlements. Captains Potapov, Golovachev, commanders of combat vehicles Samsonov, Vilshevsky, Tatsitov, Vorobyov and others showed courage and fortitude in the battles. Good fame at the front went also about the 312th Guards Mortar Regiment. None of the troops supporting the division did not provide us with such a powerful support, which provided 312 GMP, and in a number of cases the advancement of the division units we were obliged to exclusively timely and crushing fire guardsmen 312 GMP, testified the commander of the 380th Infantry Division, Colonel Kustov. The commander of the 269th Infantry Division, Major General Merzlyakov, also gave a high assessment of the actions of the guardsmen. The 312th Guardsmen accompanied the infantry of the division not only by regular fire, but also by the fire of separate batteries, which moved into the fighting order of the infantry, giving crushing volleys of direct fire. What wonderful people in our regiments! Rejoiced Lomakovsky, reading the incoming reports. I fully shared his feelings. Here are some lines from the same reports. The commander of the combat vehicle ID, Sirulev, the driver of the transport vehicle PV, Lebedev during the combat mission were wounded, but remained in the line. An instructor of the division sergeant DV, Gusev under heavy fire carried 5 men from the battlefield. Loader MD Pozdorin, replacing the wounded gunner, under heavy artillery fire, repulsed the enemy attack, hitting 3 tanks. Lieutenant K. V. Doganashev, following the order of the battery commander, in full view of the advancing fascists, brought the fighting machine to an open position and fired a volley. The result: 30 killed Hitlerites and 2 torched tanks. Or another example. A combat vehicle caught fire from a Nazi bomb. The fire threatened the nearby cars with ammunition. Private P.P. Frolov was the first to rush to extinguish the fire, dragging his comrades with him. The danger of explosion was eliminated. It was not without losses. In the name of victory over the enemy gave their lives remarkable people. Scouts led by Junior Lieutenant I.N. Povarov discovered an enemy ambush of 5 self-propelled guns and 2 tanks. Hitlerites opened machine gun fire on the scouts. Senior Sergeant N.A. Drozdov, Sergeant A.F. Fanzov, Privates Kornishev and N.N.I. Tekin died a brave death. The severely wounded Povarov was taken out of the fire by the fighter Davnichenko, who came up. Losing consciousness, Povarov managed to report the coordinates of the enemy ambush, and it was completely destroyed by Katyushas. In the 312th Regiment, the general favourite was Sergeant I.K. Korotayev. I knew this unusually enterprising and brave soldier, a communist. Korotayev and his squad repeatedly repulsed fascist counterattacks with volleys from open positions. In one of the battles, the sergeant was mortally wounded. This news was painfully echoed in the hearts of the guardsmen. Battle friends swore to avenge the enemy for his death. On the same day, the division in which Korotayev served destroyed anti-aircraft and 3 mortar batteries, 2 tanks, 6 guns, self-propelled gun, silenced 17 enemy firing points. This was the beginning of the Korotayev account. I.K. Korotayev was posthumously awarded the Order of Patriotic War II degree and forever enrolled in the lists of the 2nd Division of the 312th Guards Mortar Regiment. And after some time in the regiment formed a guileless soldier's song about Korotayev. The song took the soul, called fellow soldiers to new feats. There was fierce fighting, but did not stop party political work in the units. At the height of the Battle of Kursk, 472 Guardsmen mortars joined the Communist Party and 258 the Komsomol. When the state loan was announced in the country, the soldiers of the GMCH front subscribed a total of 5.5 million rubles, and most of the amount was paid in cash. One of the most striking and instructive examples of the combat use of the SMF in operations is undoubtedly the breakthrough of enemy defences by the troops of the 50th Army of the Bryansk front near the town of Kirov, Kaluga region. In the artillery support of this breakthrough, Guards mortar units were destined to play a decisive role. The command considered the GMCH as a powerful firing and strong manoeuvring means, capable of solving large tasks in a short time. Therefore, it was decided to entrust them with all the main tasks of artillery preparation of the offensive of our troops. Wrote in an article published in the Military History Journal No. 10 for 1959, the commander of the Bryansk front, M.M. Popov. Our preparation for the operation began on September 4th, with a reconnaissance conducted near the village of Bolshiy Savki. The task of supporting the offensive of the 50th Army troops was assigned to the 2nd Breakthrough Artillery Corps and to the GMCH group consisting of the M31 Division, 8 M13 regiments. A plan was developed for artillery preparation and interaction of units during the operation. We and the commander of the 2nd Artillery Corps, Lieutenant General M.M. Barsukov, our observation points placed on the bell tower of a large church located on the western outskirts of Kirov. On September 5th, I was at my observation post. Late in the evening, I was summoned by the front commander, Colonel General M.M. Otey. Hop off. Half an hour later, I was in his car. In the prepared area of the breakthrough, the enemy has a powerful fortified defence strip. It is difficult to count on success. Therefore, it was decided to break through from the site of the neighbouring 10th Army of the Western Front here, and the commander showed on the map the new location of the planned breakthrough. Can you, Comrade Nestorenko, for 2 nights unnoticed by the enemy, to transfer 8 of his regiments to this area with such a calculation that in the morning of September 7th they provided a breakthrough defence? If the roads for vehicles are passable, the task will be accomplished. I replied. The roads are passable. I drove along this route yesterday. The commander, giving me the task, emphasized that, deploying the GMCH in the new area, it is necessary to ensure complete secrecy and to have, by the beginning of the operation in each regiment, at least 3 volleys of shells. Remember, concluded the General, no written orders. Orders to regimental commanders to give personally. The task was not easy, but our units had a lot of experience in making such marches. Returning to headquarters, we together with Zadorin clarified the availability of combat vehicles and ammunition in the units, outlined the routes and the order of columns. Around the first hour of the night gathered regimental commanders. Each of them on the map was indicated route, defined areas of firing positions and observation posts, as well as the time of passage of control lines. Particular attention, as required by the front commander, was paid to camouflage and stealth maneuver. At 5 o'clock in the morning of September 6th, the regimental commanders were to gather on the eastern outskirts of the farm Moisievsky in the area of the new firing positions. To ensure the secrecy of the maneuver, we decided to move the regiments in 2 echelons. On the night of September 6th, marched only headquarters and platoons of regimental and divisional directorates, and the next night combat vehicles and combat supply platoons with 3 volleys of shells. Adjusters were sent out on the roads, and commandant's posts were sent to the area of firing positions. They monitored the strictest observance of light camouflage. At dawn, the movement of vehicles on the roads stopped. They were carefully hidden in the woods and bushes. Early in the morning of September 6th, we arrived with the staff officer, Senior Lieutenant Shaimov, in the area of the upcoming combat operations. In the farm Moisievskoye, already gathered regimental commanders. Perched on logs, they were having breakfast, fortified, as they say, with whatever God sent them. Everyone laid out everything he had: canned food, butter, herring, sausage. It was our custom, when commanders gathered together, a common table was organized. There was no shortage of jokes. I liked this atmosphere of good-heartedness and mutual respect. I asked for the cards to be unfolded, while the commanders took the maps out of their field bags and searched them for the places of the upcoming combat operations. I scrutinized their faces. They were young, energetic, full of good luck people. The oldest of them, Skurda, was 34 years old, and the youngest, Plotnikov, was not even 24. Skurda and Kovchur entered the battle with the enemy in the first days of the war. Many passed the harsh school of the Battle of Stalingrad, participated in the intense offensive battles of the Bryansk front. Over their shoulders, swift marches, sudden and accurate volleys, in the sharp moments of battles going out with batteries in the fighting order of infantry. A friendly family of guardsmen lived by the laws of mutual aid. All in the battles perfectly interacted with artillery, and otherwise could not be. After all, the best artillerymen were assigned to the GMCH. Yes, I thought, looking at the commanders' regiments led by such people, will not fail. I told about the combat tasks and the conditions in which to make salvos. The breakthrough was planned in a strip 4 or 5 kilometers wide. Each of our regiment had only 500 meters. Each regimental commander was responsible for suppressing the fire system, destroying strongholds and destroying the enemy's manpower in his area. Therefore, I demanded from the commanders that they themselves visited the forward rifle battalions and thoroughly studied the enemy's defense system, mapped the location of his firing points, strongholds, trenches. It was important to think over how best to put the Katyusha salvos. Regimental commanders were advised to obtain information about the enemy from the commanders of rifle battalions and artillerymen, in particular, to take from them the data of shooting on the lines and the most important targets, and to agree on which targets infantrymen and artillerymen would take over. Special attention was paid to the secrecy of volley preparation and strict observance of camouflage. Regimental commanders were allowed to take with them only one officer or scout when going to the NP and to the forward battalions. Responsibility for the right flank of the breakthrough area was assigned to Lieutenant Colonel Plotnikov, for the left on Lieutenant Colonel Karasya. To reflect the flank counterattacks of the enemy direct fire, they had to choose firing positions in the areas of their observation posts, so that if necessary, personally direct the fire of batteries. Regimental commanders began to perform the task, and Shaimov and I went to the central section of the proposed breakthrough. Leaving the car at the edge of the forest, we went to the NP of the artillery commander of the 369th Rifle Division. Then we were taken to the NP of the commander of the Rifle Battalion. From here the enemy's front line was clearly visible. I mapped his strongholds, clarified the location of our forward battalions and determined where it was expedient to put regimental volleys, areas of transfer of fire in depth and flank support during the advance of our troops. The place for my NP was chosen on the edge of the forest, not far from the observation post of the artillery commander of the 369th Infantry Division. At 16:00, the commanders of the Guards mortar regiments, as agreed, gathered at the headquarters of the 50th Army. Listening to their reports, I compared information about the enemy's front line, the system of his defences. We finally distributed the targets for each regiment, clarified the order of massive salvo attacks and methodical fire GMCH, clarified which targets are suppressed by artillery fire. At 18:00, I was already at the control centre of the commander of the 50th Army, Lieutenant General I. V. Bolden. Here was the commander of the front, Colonel General M. Popov, and the commander of the artillery of the front, Lieutenant General Nevada Gavrilenko. Our plan was approved without significant changes. Front Commander M. Popov stressed that I should have in the centralized control of at least 5 regiments. Special attention to ensure the flanks, he said. You must at any time be ready to repel counterattacks. And will you have time to accurately bind the fighting order of divisions? Asked Nevada Gavrilenko. And how will be provided shooting and control of the preparation of initial data? GMCH divisions use the shooting data of artillery units of the 10th Army, which have been here for a long time, I answered. The firing positions of the Katyushas are located near the artillery batteries, and our division commanders have already contacted the artillerymen. On the night of September 7th, the unit commanders of the 8 GMCH regiments took their NPs and established communication with the firing positions, to which the firing platoons had already arrived. By 6:00 in the morning, I reported to the front commander on the full readiness of the regiments for battle. We waited for the command. The beginning of artillery preparation was scheduled for 11:00. Combat order of the Army in the breakthrough area was built in 3 echelons in the first 2 rifle divisions, Tank Brigade and Regiment in the 2nd Rifle Division, with a tank regiment in the 3rd Cavalry Corps, and 3 rifle divisions, which were to arrive from near Kirov on September 8th. For artillery support, in addition to the regiments of the GMCH and artillery divisions, involved 5 artillery regiments of the 10th Army of the Western Front, previously located in this area. The density per kilometre of the front was about 62 barrels. This was clearly not enough. With such a number of guns to count on success was quite risky. What did the front command bet on? It was sure that the rapid and covert manoeuvre of the Guards mortar regiments and their powerful fire would make up for the lack of artillery. The calculation was made on the suddenness of the blow, on the massive fire of the GMCH, on the constraint of the main group of the enemy near Kirov, on the rapidity of the attack of the rifle divisions, the decisive entry into the breakthrough cavalry corps, and the build-up of efforts at the expense of parts transferred from near Kirov. The experience of past battles showed that in case of loss of surprise, and a large number of barrels did not ensure success. After all, in dry, quiet weather, the transfer of significant forces of artillery and tanks to new directions to hide from the enemy is difficult over the roads for a long time hanging dust clouds. The enemy had time to pull up tank and fire reserves, transferred motorized infantry and concentrated aviation. This was the case on the 11th Guards Army section south of the town of Karachov and north of this town on the section of the 11th Army near the settlements of Ogor and Orlia. What was to be done by the Guards mortar regiments and artillery on the breakthrough site? With a sudden fire attack of high density, they had to disrupt the enemy's fire system, disorganize the control of troops, destroy its manpower, destroy and suppress resistance nodes in the front line and in the depth of the defense. With all these actions, we had to ensure the advance of our infantry and tanks, disrupting possible counterattacks of the enemy. In the breakthrough participated Guards Regiments 40th Lieutenant Colonel Ag Karasia, 85th Lieutenant Colonel V.A. Plotnikov, 93rd Colonel E.G. Serdobolsky, 90th Lieutenant Colonel Ma, Yakushev, 310th Lieutenant Colonel N.M. Kovchur, 312th Lieutenant Colonel Nevada Skerda, and 313th Major D.N. Orlov. In addition to these regiments armed with BM-13, the 10th Regiment of Major Storozhko participated in the breakthrough, which had a BM-8 and was part of the 2nd Guards Cavalry Corps. Ammunition consumption for the first day of the battle, according to the plan, was 23 regimental salvos for the M13 and 3 for the M8. On the morning of September 7th, an artillery preparation began near Kirov. As expected, it restrained the main forces of the enemy, diverted his attention. And at 11 o'clock on the site of the planned breakthrough on the enemy struck aviation, regiments of Katyusha and artillery opened direct fire on pre-shot German firing points and batteries. It was a sea of fire. Dive bombers ironed the Nazi troops out of reach of the Katyushas and artillery. Under the thunderous roars of explosions, thousands of fountains of earth flew into the air. New shells were continuously bursting on the breakthrough area. Direct fire guns continued to work the front line. 20 minutes later, there was again a salvo strike of regiments of Katyusha. The wind blew a black cloud of cinders and dust toward the enemy. This made it easier for the guns to conduct direct fire, creating favorable opportunities for the advance of our infantry. About 5 minutes after our infantrymen went on the attack, followed by 2 regimental volleys on the flanks to prevent counterattacks. It must be said that in what followed the enemy made more than one attempt to undertake them. Especially persistent and fierce counterattacks followed from the right flank, from the side of the settlements Zimitsa and Mylevo. Here Hitlerites managed to squeeze our rifle battalions and anti-tank guns. At this time, the battery of Katyusha of the division of Captain A.F. Panuev came to the open position. F. Panuev. With its direct fire volleys, the battery not only repelled the enemy counterattack, but also turned it into flight. Right flank battalions again went on the offensive. For 20 minutes on the breakthrough area was fired more than 8,000 shells, including 6,000 rockets and about 2,000 artillery shells. The suddenness and force of the fire attack did its job. GMCH and artillery in cooperation with aviation provided the troops of the 50th Army to break through the enemy defences. By the end of the day, the breakthrough front had expanded to 8 kilometres. On the battlefield lay hundreds of corpses of Nazi soldiers and officers. Many enemy artillery batteries, covered by the devastating fire of Katyusha, lost their calculations without firing a single shot and were captured by our infantry. The advancing troops were already fighting deep in the Hitlerites' defences. GMCH and artillery began fire support of our tanks and infantry. In addition, we had to suppress enemy units and subdivisions concentrated for counterattacks, smash the retreating columns of Germans, who, avoiding encirclement, hastily left the forest, throwing weapons and military equipment. On the same day, the 2nd Guards Cavalry Corps of Lieutenant General V. Kryukov was brought into the breakthrough. Kryukov. To reinforce the corps was attached to the 40th Guards Mortar Regiment of Lieutenant Colonel A. G. Karasya. This regiment was the most mobile compared to the others, had in better condition vehicles. September 8th, with the entry into battle divisions of the 2nd echelon of the breakthrough, was increased to 30 kilometres in width and to 25 in depth. The 2nd Cavalry Corps with 2 regiments of Katyusha was rapidly advancing in the direction of Zhukovka. The enemy hastily threw in reserves and undertook flank counterattacks, seeking to cut off the cavalry entered into the breakthrough and close the gap in its defence. For 3 days there was fierce fighting on the flanks, in which the 40th Guards Mortar Regiment played a major role. He struck at the enemy infantry and tanks, and thus disrupted his counterattacks. Invaluable assistance to the Guards was rendered by the Chief of Intelligence of the 24th Red Banner Division of the 40th Guards Mortar Regiment Senior Lieutenant N. I. Vinnikov, sent to the rear of the enemy by the division commander Yar A. Berezin. Having scouted out the enemy forces, the senior lieutenant by radio called the division's fire on the concentration of Nazi tanks and infantry. For his courage, Vinnikov was awarded the Order of Patriotic War of the II degree. Unfortunately, the officer did not live to see the end of the war. On June 20, 1944, on the Kalian front, near the village of Tuscany, N.I., Vinnikov, being with his scouts in the front lines, led the infantry to storm a stronghold and died a hero's death. Posthumously, he was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. New artillery units were brought into the breakthrough, which were transferred from near Kirov. The enemy failed to cut off the 2nd Cavalry Corps from the infantry divisions, could not stop the rapid advance of our troops. On September 11th, our cavalry captured Zhukovka, seized a bridgehead on the western bank of Desna, and cut the road to Roslavl. Having no reserves to restore the front, and being afraid of encirclement, the fascist command was forced to order the 12th and 53rd Corps to withdraw. The troops of the Bryansk front immediately went in pursuit of the enemy. During these battles, the enemy suffered huge losses. 3 of his divisions were defeated completely, 4 infantry divisions, 2 tank divisions, several guard battalions lost most of their personnel. The breakthrough in the area of Mokro, Krychok provided not only tactical, but also operational success. Our troops liberated from the Nazi invaders of the cities of Bryansk, Bezhitsa, Arneka, Polshep and others. By order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of September 17, 1943, the troops who participated in the liberation of the cities of Bryansk and Bezhitsa were commended, and a salute was given in Moscow in honor of this victory. The 310th and 74th Guards Mortar Regiments were named Bezhitsa Mortar Regiments. Commanders of the Guards Mortar Regiments, many soldiers and officers were awarded orders. In these days I was awarded the rank of Lieutenant General of Artillery. Our troops advanced west of Bryansk for 35 to 50 kilometers. There was an operational pause. It was necessary to regroup troops, pull up the rear, bring ammunition and fuel. There was an opportunity to gather commanders of units to summarize the results of the battles. At the meeting, we comprehensively discussed the practice of combat operations of the Guards mortar units of the Bryansk front, summarized the accumulated experience. I was pleased to note that during the battles the skill of the command staff has grown significantly. The Guardsmen have matured and gained a wealth of experience. Regiments and brigades acted, as a rule, in concert, often helped each other, shared fuel, food, mutual assistance in the transportation of shells. This applied primarily to the regiments of Serdobolsky, Karasya, Skurdy. It is no coincidence that these officers usually headed the groups of GMCH, which were created for massive strikes on the enemy. Quite coped with their tasks. Art Warehouse, to speed up the transfer of large batches of shells to the right directions, was organized several intermediate support bases. However, there were some omissions in the work of rear units of the task force. In particular, the rear of some units and the artillery warehouse did not always have time to collect and timely send to the defense plants boxes of shells. Of course, in combat conditions, especially during the offensive, this is not an easy, troublesome matter, but it was impossible to consider it not worthy of attention. Our task force alone in the last offensive battles fired 100,000 shells at the enemy, and this is 50,000 boxes large lined with iron. It is not difficult to estimate what savings of funds, materials, labour gives the return of containers. At the meeting we unanimously agreed that the past offensive battles contain a lot of interesting and instructive in the use of the Guards mortar regiments. Since the Guards mortar regiments of the front, as a rule, were not dispersed among armies and divisions, but were used in groups in the direction of the main strikes, it allowed to use manoeuvrability and the huge power of Salvos Katyusha with maximum efficiency to ensure the suddenness of fire attacks. And as experience showed, the sudden salvos of the SMGs so stunned the enemy that our troops often captured his strongholds relatively easily, without heavy losses. This was the case in the 11th Guards Army in the area of Ilyinskoye, Gnezdilovo, where a group of 7 regiments and 1 brigade of M30, interacting with artillery, ensured the breakthrough of enemy defences. During the breakthrough of defences and the capture of Kotinets in the Karakovev direction, where the group of 4 regiments, 1 brigade and a separate division operated during the offensive on Bryansk, where the group of the GMCH consisted of 7 regiments, 3 brigades and a separate division in the section of the 50th Army in the area of Orlia, Kalinino, where the group of the GMCH consisted of 7 regiments, 2 brigades near the city of Kirov, Kaluga region, where the breakthrough support group included 8 regiments of M13, 1 regiment of M8 and a division of M30. The initiator of such use of SMF was the commander of the front troops, Colonel General Fall. Popov, who appreciated the capabilities of reactive artillery as an effective means of supporting offensive operations. Massive use of RMF with a quick, timely and covert transfer of them from one direction to another required from the task force, its headquarters tense, precise work, and our small staff coped with the task. This is primarily the merit of the officers of the headquarters headed by Colonel V.I. Zadorin. Successful work of the headquarters was facilitated by a system of centralized management and supply, direct subordination and communication regiment task force, GMCH front headquarters of the commander of the GMCH. Guards regiments were well provided with motor transport. This alone made it possible to have liaison officers from each unit or group of regiments at the headquarters of the front's task force. Constant and reliable communication, as you know, is crucial in the management of troops. In the Guards, regiments' radio stations operated without fail. In addition, in order to communicate with the headquarters of the task force of the GMCH of the front, the commanders of the Guards regiments had the right to use the means of communication in the headquarters of rifle divisions, corps and armies. Consequently, we had favourable conditions for the rapid transmission of combat orders and instructions, for mutual information. Guards mortar regiments, as a rule, operated in the front line of 250 to 300 kilometres. This circumstance to some extent imposed on the style of management GMCH. Regiments operating in the most critical areas were under constant control. There were periods when day in and day out I, and my deputy colonel Kochetkov had to travel by car 200 to 300 kilometres, and sometimes more. During the first 2 years of the war, as I was convinced, the headquarters of divisions, corps and armies, as well as the front headquarters, spent a lot of time on the execution of operational documents. But the later the orders and combat orders reached the units, the less time the commanders had for their execution. It is clear that this led to additional difficulties, especially in those cases when the fulfillment of the combat task required the transfer of units from one section of the front to another. Our headquarters stopped waiting for the finalization of orders and combat orders at the front headquarters. As soon as the decision of the command became known, we immediately sent communication officers to the units with maps and verbal combat orders. And we also hurried to the units. In new areas of combat operations, while the units were marching, we with General Army and Artillery Chiefs clarified combat tasks, linked the interaction with artillery, infantry and tank units. On the sides of combat and transport vehicles of our task force GMCH still had an identifying sign, the Roman 5. The same sign was applied on the signs, which were installed at intersections and bypasses. It served as a regulator, helping lagging units and individual vehicles to find their units. The method of combat management of the Guards mortar units of the front in comparison with other branches of the troops had its own peculiarities. The fact is that the salvos of divisions, regiments, brigades GMCH are hundreds and thousands of powerful shells fired in a few tens of seconds. What responsibility was placed on commanders for timely and accurately placed salvos? What high discipline and organization, coherence of actions these salvos required from the entire personnel of the regiment, brigade. Guards mortar units, as already mentioned, were very often moved from one section of the front to another, from army to army, and in armies from division to division. Throws and marches, as a rule, were made suddenly at a high tempo. Commanders and political committees, party and Komsomol organizations carried out a lot of work aimed at disciplining soldiers, sergeants and officers on the march, clarity in work, diligence, unconditional compliance with the orders of commanders and superiors. In turn, commanders and staffs exercised strict control over the execution of orders and instructions. The troops of the Bryansk front liberated the towns of Pochep, Arneka, Klintsy, Novozybkov. Gomel was next in line. But the unexpected happened by the order of the Stavka. The Bryansk front was disbanded. Its armies were subordinated to the Central Front, and the headquarters and other management bodies, units and formations of the front's subordination, headed by the front commander, General Popov, were transferred to the area of Veliki Luki and Naval by railroad echelons. Our task force GMCH in 5 regiments, 3 brigades of the 2nd Guards Mortar Division, an artillery depot, and PRM were also sent there. At the line from Lake Ilmen to the city of Nevel from the troops of the Northwestern, partly Kalinin and Bryansk fronts was created front, which from October 20th, 1943, became known as the Second Baltic.